The Kansas City Chiefs are coming off a Super Bowl win, a back-to-back Super Bowl win, and now let's go ahead and kind of talk about what's next. What's the next step for this Kansas City Chiefs team to possibly go win 3 in a row? And so what I like to do in these videos is give some context of this offseason and what they could do. And then I'm going to give you what I believe is the next best step or plan for the Chiefs to do better next year and even win the Super Bowl once again. So let's go ahead and get into that. Now, I like to have some big questions, and there's not really a big question. I guess re-signing some of these players. What about these free agents? Is one, and we'll definitely talk about that. But also another one I just kind of written down was three-peat. You're seeing the Chiefs win the Super Bowl, but they're not talking about next year already, right? You're talking about next year and not the offseason, not this Super Bowl, but we're talking about next year's Super Bowl. That y'all just won this one, and now all of a sudden you're talking about the next one. But it's fair. I mean, they've done it. They've obviously cemented a dynasty. They've won it 3 times in 5 years, and they've been to it 4 times in 5 years. So it's well deserved. But let's talk about the notable free agents on this team. In the start, let's talk about the effective cap space via overthecap.com. It's about $12 million, right? And it could very well go up or down depending on who they re-sign, who they let go, some cap casualties, and obviously with the draft picks, do they, what could they trade some and get some money, But that's about it, But it could go up to $20 million. It could be $20 million. I've seen some different sources, right? But based off over the cap, it is $12 million. But let's talk about the notable free agents. And before we get into the 2 big ones, I'm going to talk about Mike Edwards, Nick Allegretti, Drew Tranquill, and Mike Dana, and Donovan Smith. I think they are all in a way expendable. I think you can let some of them go, but I think Mike Dana, bringing him back, I think would be smart to bring some continuity, some depth to that defensive line. And I think probably Drew Tranquill would be a nice guy to bring back. And I expect Nick Allegretti to go somewhere else, even though he was a great backup, obviously played a huge role once Joe Thuney, who got injured, right? So I expect him to probably be starting somewhere else, and I don't think he's going to resign with the Chiefs. But obviously now we have Chris Jones and L'Jarius Sneed, the 2 big ones, right? 2 very important pieces to why they won this Super Bowl. L'Jarius Sneed makes some great plays. Chris Jones coming in clutch when they had Debo open down for a touchdown, but just blew up the play. And Brock Purdy couldn't make an accurate pass, and that was a game changer of a play in the Super Bowl. And that's what he does. He's one of the best defensive players in the draft, or not in the draft, in the NFL, and he's still doing it at a very high level, even though, right, he's not on this biggest contract. And obviously they're trying to figure out a contract, and I don't know if it's going to work. I don't know if a long-term contract is going to work, and maybe it does, because Chris Jones is giving, when you're at the parade, obviously he's everything hype and stuff, but it did kind of believe me that he was going to be back. I don't know how likely that is still, even though, it's possible. I expect him to get a new agent. I feel like he kind of threw his agent under the bus a few times with some things he said before the Super Bowl and stuff like that. So that's happening. And then you obviously have L'Jarius Sneed, who is part of this young defense, the youngest defense in the NFL, if I'm not mistaken, and still about 24, I think, 25, something like that. And obviously a big reason why the Chiefs were able to get to the Super Bowl and win the Super Bowl. You got him on the other side of Trent McDuffie, and that's a really good cornerback pairing. And I just don't know if you can get both of them. Maybe you can, but I think it's going to be one or the other. And I also think if you sign Chris Jones, I think that kind of takes you out of the running for a lot of free agency and offseason moves, because that's going to be a lot of money. They're both going to be a lot of money, but I think you can maybe work out L'Jarius Sneed contract a little bit more, especially with him being younger and stuff like that. But you have that, and we'll definitely talk about that a little bit later, and kind of I'll give my opinions on it when I'm talking about what that next step is for the Kansas City Chiefs. And then notable free agents, I don't take too much into this, but I do think it's interesting and important to talk about this when we're especially talking about these two big players, and L'Jarius Sneed and Chris Jones, and talking about contracts, because they got a lot of guys to re-sign next year, and maybe some of them they do re-sign this year, right? Nick Bolton is a free agent in 2025. Harrison Butker is, Creed Humphrey, Justin Reed, and Trey Smith. All guys who I think could be back. I think Justin Reed is probably a little bit more expendable because I think they could be building a really good secondary, a young secondary over there. And so by that time, maybe you got somebody who can take the reins from Justin Reed, right? But Nick Bolton, a big part of that linebacker, big part of that defense. Harrison Butker, obviously a really good kicker. We saw that in the Super Bowl. Creed Humphrey, a really good offensive lineman. We've seen that. And Trey Smith, who I think is a pretty serviceable and pretty good offensive lineman as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see some of those guys get extended this year and kind of figure out that future cap space, because obviously this is a very win now team, obviously, but when you have Patrick Mahomes, the future is always very important when you're looking 5 years out, because he's going to be here for a very long time, and I don't see him slowing down in the next 5+ years, right? So I think also talking about the future is very important when talking about the Kansas City Chiefs. And also the draft, definitely a place you got to look at here. And I think that's definitely part of the next step. But just to give a little bit of context, I think if that first-round pick receiver is going to be huge, right? And I think also investing in the defensive line, right? So, and some other receivers, and obviously a lot of other things. They're not going to draft defensive line and just wide receivers. But let's go ahead and talk about the next step here for the Kansas City Chiefs. So the next step for the Kansas City Chiefs is surround Patrick Mahomes with ton of talent and develop. Now, what does that entail? I think that entails a lot of things, right? I think this offseason is huge for the future as we look at this team and we're like, this may be the worst team that Patrick Mahomes has in a very long time, and they won the Super Bowl, which is so scary. And so what I have right now is continuity, right? I think that is one of the biggest things here for the Kansas City Chiefs is continuity. Especially when we talk about some of these big players. And whatever I have here is re-sign Chris Jones and or L'Jarius Sneed. And I don't know how likely getting both of them is. I think getting one of them is one of the biggest. I think they're going to get one of them. I think one of them staying. Either be on a franchise tag or a newly extended deal. And if I was the GM, I think I'm prioritizing L'Jarius Sneed just because of his age, and just having two great cornerbacks like that is very hard to have, but also very impactful, right? Like, that's huge when you can have a good secondary, but it is so hard to make that decision because of how good Chris Jones is. He is a dominant force and will be for the next few years, right? So it's a hard decision to make if you have to choose one or the other, but I'm going to go L'Jarius Sneed, but if you can get both, obviously try to do that. Another one is just draft well. Going back to what I was talking about in the draft well, and that's what they've done the past few years. That's how they've been so successful, is they've drafted well outside of the first round. Nick Bolton wasn't a first-round pick. Leo Chanel wasn't a first-round pick. Isaiah Pacheco wasn't a first-round pick. Travis Kelce wasn't a first-round pick. Creed Humphreys wasn't a first-round pick. All of these top players weren't first-round picks other than like Patrick Mahomes, Trent McDuffie, and some other guys like Felix Anudike-Uzomah and George Karlaftis. And other than that, it's like you've had some impactful players that weren't drafted in the first round, or that y'all didn't draft, that the Chiefs didn't draft, right? So I think that's very important, is to draft well and continue this line. So, when we talk about wide receivers in the first round, if they can get Brian Thomas Jr., A.D. Mitchell, or Troy Franklin, they are winners of that first round. All guys who can be downfield deep threats. I think Troy Franklin, can be a guy that can also just obviously be an insane yards after the catch guy, which is something I feel like the Chiefs kind of want, right? You've seen it with Travis Kelce, Rashee Rice, obviously, right? And I mean, even when they drafted Sky Moore, it seemed like that's like a type of player they really want to find. And I still think there's a chance they really want to find that type of player, even though Troy Franklin isn't as shifty probably as Rashee Rice, but give him space, catches a slant with space. He's gone into the house. You better have some safeties back there, but even that, it's going to be tough to catch up with Troy Franklin. Again, either one of Brian Thomas Jr., A.D. Mitchell, Troy Franklin, that's a really good first round. And then you can invest into the edge rusher, some interior defensive line in free agency as well, but also in the draft as well. I think we'd be smart, especially if you don't re-sign Chris Jones. I think that's another thing. And the last thing I kind of have here is develop the young core. Develop the young core you already have with Nick Bolton, L'Jarius Sneed, Trent McDuffie. In a way, Patrick Mahomes is still pretty young, but obviously Rashee Rice, Isaiah Pacheco, the young offensive line with Creed Humphreys, Trey Smith, Obviously you're going to have to figure out something with the tackle position. Jawan Taylor, I think, would probably stay at right tackle. Maybe look for a replacement for Donovan Smith, right? And, Sky Moore he's still on the team, right? And the next draft. The next draft that's going to be part of this young core, right? And I find that's so important if they can just develop these guys and continuing to develop these guys. Let me also go back to continuity really quick. Continuity in the coaching staff. Obviously, you're going to have Andy Reid for a while. You brought back Spagnuolo, or Spagnuolo, I'm not too sure how you say his name, but you brought back Spags, so that's a huge thing. And I would assume Matt Nagy's probably the offense coordinator again. And heck, if you want to bring Eric Bieniemy back for something, I don't know, that is possible. Do that too, And I think that's another thing when you talk about continuity with the Chiefs. And it's all there. It's all there to win the Super Bowl once again. And it's obviously really hard. And it may sound crazy, but heck, we could be looking at 4 in a row, 5 in a row. I don't think it happens, but call me crazy, 6 in a row. Just with how good this team is and how good Patrick Mahomes is, the Chiefs would have to do something terrible. They would have to mess up so badly to not be a Super Bowl contender every year. And heck, probably even make it to the AFC Championship every year. I could see this team getting back to that championship game in the next 3-4 years still. It's hard to see two other teams make it to the AFC Championship and not one of those teams being the Chiefs. So that's what I kind of thought. I'm kind of talking about the future, but the next steps is very intermediate. Continuity, draft well, and develop that young core, which can very well happen in this offseason. So that's kind of what I think for the Chiefs, and that's what I think their next step is for this offseason and also heading into this next season. So what do you think, Kansas City Chiefs fans? What are your thoughts as I kind of talked about this Chiefs team? And hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.